Hey, what's up, nerds? Paul here at Radio Free Hammer Hall, and today we're going to continue our series on the cities of Sigmar, and we are going to go completely out of order and go to the last city in the book, that is Tempest's Eye, and we're going to talk about this city, the pros, the cons, the good, the bad, the ugly, and what this does. And I'm going to try to not be too much of Man Reads book, but I'm going to read the book a bit because it's kind of necessary when we're having a conversation about Tempest Eye. So let's just take a quick look through the battle traits, command traits, artifacts, and the spell lore, and then we'll get into some of the builds that we're looking at with Tempest Eye, and I guess we could talk about the battalion too, but I've got the book right in front of me, so away we go. One of the biggest things with the Tempest Eye battle traits is alert and forewarned. On your first turn, you get an additional 3-inch movement to all of your units, and you add one to save rolls for all of your units in the first battle round. So that's huge. That gives you a real, if you're going first, it gives you the ability to really advance a lot further on your opponent. And defensively, it really gives you a much better opportunity to screen out all of those Alpha Strike armies. And that's incredibly powerful in AOS right now, to have that sort of alpha bunkering going on, because some of the top tier lists revolve around getting in to your enemy lines first turn really aggressively. And if you can repel that and then use your own own offensive units to counterattack on the next turn, then you have a huge advantage. So right there, I think that's definitely potent. Does it stop your opponent from doing that turn 2 and just positioning turn 1 instead? It doesn't stop that, but it kind of puts a little bit of extra thought into what they have to do. Also, we have Outriders of the Realms. All of your stuff is just +1 to run all the time. Our command ability is rapid redeploy, so it lets you run and shoot, which is pretty good. But for a command point, that's kind of a lot of resources into a run and shoot, because you're probably also going to want to spend another command point to make sure that run is a 6. So when you're starting to do that, now you're talking a lot of command points. I think the biggest battle trait, though, for Tempest Eye is standing contracts, which allows you to use Caradron Overlord's units in your army, 1 in 4 units. So if you have 1 for every 3 other units in the army. So 25% of the units in your army can be Caradron Overlords. That is absolutely huge, and I'm going to get more into why later, but I think this one ability is what really puts Tempest Eye in the conversation for not only being the best city in the book, but being a tier 1 competitive list. I'm going to get into that more later, and we're just going to continue on through the stuff in the book first, and then we'll talk more about what you do with these things. But to just make a point that I'm not kidding, got my Ether Chemist here, going to be ordering up some other things very soon to flesh out a competitive Tempest Eye army. So what else do we have? Oh, and just to extend the point, got these guys too. So our command traits, Ether Guard Captain, add 1 to charge rolls for Tempest Eye units within 12 inches of the general. Hawkeye, add 1 to wound rolls made for missile weapons that are within 12 inches of the general. Both of these are wholly within, by the way. And Swift as the Wind, the general can run in charge and always fights first in combat. That Swift as the Wind can be really powerful. The other two are pretty meh, I think. And I think that's going to be a trend that we see through a lot of Tempest Sai, is that a lot of the stuff is a little bit meh. And that's why I really emphasize that being able to use Caradron Overlords is really, I think, the key to a strong Tempest Sai list, and probably why the rest of this stuff is a little bit powered down in comparison to some of the other cities. Artifacts of Power. You can do the Patrician's Helm. Units wholly within 12 inches are immune to Battle Shock. What is this? Seerstone Amulet. Every hero phase, you roll a d6 on a 4-up, you get a command point. And Zephyrite Banner, you can reroll charges for Tempest Sai units wholly within 12 inches. Now, if we go through all of these command traits and all of these artifacts of power, these are shockingly generic and uninteresting for the most part. I'm not sure what you even pick. And the important thing here, too, is that Tempest Sai is one of the Akshi cities, so you get access to all of the Akshi artifacts. And I think a lot of times you're probably going to be taking an Akshi artifact instead of one of your Treasures of Titan Spear. But that said, rerolling charges for free is good. That's ordinarily a command point. Immunity to Battle Shock within 12 inches is pretty good, especially considering that I think one of the better strategies for playing Tempest Sai is to really have a strong defense backed up by shooting. So if you have that defensive line backed up by a hero with the Patrician's Helm preventing Battle Shock, you can put up a pretty formidable defense to what your opponent is doing and then shoot the shit out of them on your turn. So spells. Aura of Glory casts on a 7 until the start of your next hero phase. Add 1 to the attacks characteristic of melee weapons for units wholly within 12 inches of the caster. That could be incredibly powerful when you're doing offensive things. Again, if your hero that happens to have the Patrician's Helm also is a wizard and has Aura of Glory, then you can really punch back pretty hard, as well as being able to take a punch. So it's an interesting thought there. I don't know if that's necessarily what you want to do. Casting on a 7 is always a dubious thing, in my opinion. I don't like anything higher than a 6 unless I get casting buffs. But by the way, you can take a sorceress and get +2 to cast by killing a guy, and you can take Celestial Hurricanum and get +1 to cast. So there's options for that in this book. So it being on a 7, if you really want that, there's ways around having a crappy casting value. Number 2 is Strike of Eagles. Cast on a 7 as well. And you pick 1 enemy unit within 30 inches. And you roll 6 dice for each 4-up. The enemy unit takes a mortal wound. Doing on average 3 mortal wounds is not that impressive, especially for a casting value of 6. I like that it's 30 inches, but it's not that exciting. And then Celestial Visions, cast on a 7, and if successfully cast, you get a command point. Also, very, very uninteresting. So I think you're probably going to take Aura of Glory on all of your wizards, unless you have multiple wizards and you take Celestial Visions on one of them. That's usually going to be casting the spell on their scroll and on the off turn where you're not going to cast the spell on their scroll, you're like, let's try for a command point. So that is what we've got out of the basic command abilities. I'm just going to flip over real quick to our battalion that is the Aetherguard Windrunners. So we have to take a Free Guild General on Griffin. We have to take 3 to 6 units of Outriders or Pistoliers, and 0 to 2 Grunstock Gun Haulers. And units from this battalion can retreat and still shoot and or charge later in the same turn. That's terrible. Like, I don't understand why that's a thing. I don't get. I don't see anybody ever taking that. Just, I don't see it. So anyway, flipping back to our actual command abilities and talking about what we're going to do with this army and why it's actually good, and what like the tier 1 list conversation is. Because I've already personally seen this list take second at a GT, or a version of this list second at a GT, and it was a 5-0. It lost on soft score to the first place. Don't know in a head-to-head with the other 5-0 if it would have won or lost. But here is the basic concept of what I think you do with a competitive Tempest side list. And it all really hinges on the Kharadron Overlords piece. You want to take an Ether Chemist. For those not familiar and that don't feel like looking it up, the Ether Chemist in your hero phase can choose a nearby Kharadron Overlords unit and add 1 to the attacks characteristic of one of the weapon profiles of that unit. So that can be melee, that can be shooting. Important to note that a lot of Kharadron Overlords units have multiple weapons profiles. So you're not going like all weapons profiles. You're picking one particular weapons profile and giving it +1. So then you combine that either with Sky Wardens or with your Arcanaut Company, and you add +1 to the attacks characteristic of either your drill cannons or your why am I losing the word? Your other shooty ability. Why am I losing this word right now? Your the grapply hook thingies. I don't know why my brain is not processing this right now, but it's kind of important that I know this, and I'm just going to kind of draw this out for a second and see if I can find the word. It'll come to me later. Anyway, the point is 24-inch shot, 4s and 3s, Ren 2, D3 damage. And in your Arcanaut Company, light skyhooks. That's the word I was looking for. So in your Arcanaut Company, you get 3 of those for every 10 models. You run a big block of Arcanaut Company. You use the Chemist to double your attacks on your light skyhooks. You get tons of light skyhook attacks and blow a lot of things up. Similarly, you can do the same thing with either drill cannons or light skyhooks, depending on how you arm your Sky Wardens. Now you're going to get less shots on the Sky Wardens with that particular weapon, but they also have Aethermatic volley guns that are doing a ton of attacks that are also pretty strong. So that's the basic thing that's really powerful. And the note that I just want to make on Sky Wardens versus your Arcanaut Company is that I think running Sky Wardens personally is more future-proofing your army. Currently, the War Scroll for Arcanaut Company lets you take up to 3 light skyhooks for every 10 models, but the kit only comes with 1 light skyhook for every 10 models. And I suspect that when we get a new book for Caradron Overlords that we're going to go to 1 light skyhook per 10. And the points will probably change, but the point is that then you're looking at 1 light skyhook per 10 versus 1 light skyhook or drill cannon per 3 on your Sky Wardens. And I think you're going to end up with comparable power, and the Sky Wardens move really fast. They have other shooting attacks that are really good. So I think in terms of future-proofing your army, the Sky Wardens are a better choice. Even currently, I think they may be a better choice because all of those light skyhook shots can sometimes be major overkill. So what synergy do we have here? We have a lot of cheap infantry in the Cities of Sigmar book that has a 3-up save. Or we also have Phoenix Guard, which have a 4-up save and a 4-up save against wounds and mortal wounds. So those are more expensive, obviously. But we have several options with a 3-up save. And in the first battle round, that goes to a 2-up. So you have a nigh impenetrable wall of stuff on turn 1 that can protect all of your shooters. In addition to that, we have access to the Celestial Hurricanum, which gives your Cities of Sigmar units within 10 inches +1 to hit. And that includes missile weapons. So if you put your shooty guys from the Caradron Overlords, which gain Cities of Sigmar keyword in this particular city, then you're also giving them +1 to hit. So now your light skyhooks and drill cannons are on 3s and 3s instead of 4s and 3s, which is much more reliable. So you're going to be getting a lot more of those shots into your opponent. It's just generally really, really good. So the general idea of the build is having a strong defensive line backed up by very powerful shooting, and then also having other blocks in your army of things that are offensively powerful. Now, you could do that with great swords. You could do that with Blackguard and put that in combination with a sorceress so that you can sacrifice Blackguard to get buffs off the sorceress to cast spells. Or alternatively, you could also use Iron Breakers. There's a variety of things that you can do. You can have use the combo of Phoenix Guard to have the offense and the defense in one unit. Personally, I don't really like that choice. I mean, it's sort of a separate discussion, but I don't really like Phoenix Guard personally because they're in this weird place where they're pretty good on offense and they're really good on defense and they're really expensive, and I'm not sure what their role is. So that's sort of just an aside. So that's the basic idea of making the competitive list. In general, I'm not sure that Tempest Eye is really that good unless you're using that combo with Caradron Overlords. There's certainly some things that you can do. You can just build out the rest of it as like a gunline army that utilizes all of the stuff that's already in Cities of Sigmar. Use your handgunners, use your Iron Drakes, various other shooty units, your crossbows, get them a big move up in the first turn and fire away. So again, that's an option, but most of those things get a big bonus when they don't move. So it kind of counters that whole thing. Pistoliers and Outriders, I think, do get stronger in this city because you can run them forward and shoot and not really have much of a penalty for doing so. They're also very quick and nimble, good for taking objectives, which a lot of times Cities of Sigmar, I think, has mobility problems for capturing objectives. So one thing that I have also seen is people running units of 3 Scourge Runner chariots to uh, be sort of a defensive block that also has some shooting, takes up a lot of room, and can grab objectives quickly. So that's a possibility in there as well. They're really cheap. They're like 150 points for 3. So that's an option that's floating out there. So the weird thing about Tempest Sai to me is that the best, most competitive builds out of Tempest Sai have nothing to do with Cities of Sigmar and everything to do what Cities of Sigmar does in combination with Kharadron Overlords. And I'm not sure that you get a really strongly competitive list out of Tempest Sai without Kharadron Overlords in there. Now, let me frame this in with I have done some testing with Tempest Sai without Kharadron Overlords in it, and it was really fun. And there's some things that you can do that are interesting. And there's one build that I particularly like that I want to try out that I haven't done yet. But here is the basic idea is that you take 2 free guild generals on Griffin, you give one of them Swift as the Wind, and give the other one perhaps a Thermal Rider Cloak, and you charge those across the table on the first turn, and you get to fight with both of them before your opponent gets to fight back, and they'll be on a 2-up save. So even when your opponent fights back, they're not going to do a lot of damage. Now, in future turns, your opponent is going to have 2 big griffins to deal with in their face while you get the rest of your army around and capture objectives, work on them with shooting, all of these other things. It really is a powerful alpha strike that I think you can do. And there's a lot of people out there that have multiple griffins because of playing a lot of free guild previous to this, where 2 to 3 griffins was pretty common in a free guild list. So there's plenty of people out there with multiple griffins, and I think running 2 griffins in a Tempest Sai list is certainly a thing you can do and be pretty successful with. Is it tier 1 successful? I don't know. I don't think so. Is it have a lot of fun and win some games at your local shop and some local tournaments good? Yeah, absolutely. Just don't expect to go 5-0 at a GT with it, because it's just not going to happen. Can you go 5-0 at a GT with Tempest Sai with Kharadron Overlords shooting in it? Oh, it's literally happened multiple times already. So, yes, absolutely. I think that particular build is very, very strong because you take some of the best defense in the game with some of the best shooting in the game, and shooting is good in the meta right now, but a lot of the armies with good shooting have other major drawbacks, but Cities of Sigmar fills in those drawbacks very well. So you take Kharadron Overlords, which are probably the best shooting in the game, if not best, top 3. And you put them in an army that can defend the shooting really well, and suddenly you have a very powerful army. So I think you can put together some really potent forces with Tempest Sai. You can do fun stuff with it too. Swift as the Wind, I think, is just really good. Rapid redeploy can do some interesting things. Alert and Forewarned is just generally pretty good, but if you take away Kharadron Overlords being included in this thing for a minute, this is like the most bland, average city that just does a bunch of stuff that's pretty good, but not that exciting. It is a pretty good default city when you're just new, you're building a list, and you're not sure what you're doing Tempest Sai gives you a lot of buffs that are not that complicated, that are just going to make your game easier. It's very similar, I think, to Hammerhall in that way, where it's giving you a lot of buffs that you just want anyway. So it's not even like, it doesn't necessarily have to be built around if you're a newer player or a more casual player. It's a bunch of abilities that are just kind of good, that no matter what you do, you're going to have a use for them. So that's my basic thoughts on Tempest Sai right now. Excuse me. I like Tempest Sai a lot. I'm personally working on building a more competitive Tempest Sai list. The current core of that list for me is going to be 20 Longbeards, 12 Sky Wardens, and an Ether Chemist. And then the rest of the list right now, I'm not sure. There's some other arguments and options for other units, like Hammerers are also a good option that you could build instead of Longbeards. I'm sorry, Ironbreakers, not Hammerers. Alternatively, I think it's Glade Guard. Let me flip through my book for a moment, because I know it's Eternal Guard, not Glade Guard. Because Glade Guard doesn't exist anymore. But Eternal Guard, I think, is also a very strong option, because they're a 3-up when your opponent charges you, and they have 2 attacks each. So, similarly to your Ironbreakers, it's 3-up save with 2 attacks. And the Eternal Guard are a little bit better because they're an extra 2 movement. So you get, like, first turn, like a 9-inch move up with them, plus potentially a run. So that is pretty good. I like that a lot. Is it the list that I'm going to run? No. I personally like the Longbeards better, because they also have the 3-up save when you take them with shields, and they are 20 points cheaper per 10, so it leaves you more in the list for other things. Sky Wardens, I think, are some hot tech to use in the list, because they are not only powerful shooters, they are also highly mobile, so they can run and grab objectives and all of those sorts of things, especially later in the game. One of the things that you really have problems with, I think, in Cities of Sigmar is capturing objectives when the objectives are way over there. It's hard to get a lot of models onto an objective quickly. You can get, your big stuff across the board. You can get Demigryphs over there, Drake Spawn Riders. You can get your Griffin, your Black Dragon. All of that stuff can get over there. Even like your Scourge Runner chariots you can get over there, but it's only a 3 model count, and that can be a big problem, especially because, like, the Scourge Runner chariots don't have a lot in terms of offense, so you have to rely more on your other units shooting stuff off of objectives and then going and grabbing them. Whereas, like, Sky Wardens can just kind of get in there and sometimes just outnumber stuff, because you'll have, like, potentially like 9 or 12 of them. So those are just my general thoughts on Tempest Sai. Hopefully this is helpful for people. I think taking Caradron Overlords is really the key to, like, unlocking Tempest Sai's power. I think all of the other abilities would definitely be powered up a lot more if you couldn't take Caradron Overlords in there. And so I think if you're not using them, you're definitely at, like, this built-in handicap, because I think the rest of it was balanced around taking an Ether Chemist in a block of Arcanaut Company or a block of Sky Wardens. So those things in combination, I think, really inform how you should be building your list. Without Corrosion Overlords, this is a very bland city. It's a good city, um, but I don't think it's necessarily the best city if you are not using KO. Anyway, I've kind of repeated myself a few times here. Hopefully, I've driven the point home. I'm going to be testing more with it. I'm currently building out a more competitive list with it. Is that like my number one thing that I care about out of this book? No, not really. There's a lot of other options that I like. I'm not necessarily going to be doing Tempest unless I'm like trying to win a tournament. For more casual games, would I run Tempest without Quadrant Overlords? Sure. Would I take something like Living City because like ambushing demigriffs is really fun? Yeah, that's the kind of thing that I would probably do. So, anywho, that is it for now. Hopefully, this was informative for all of you. I'll see you all later.